There's a story I've never fully shared with anyone, a story that has silently resided in my heart for decades. At 76, I, Eleanor, am finally ready to open up. Not to seek pity, but because I believe my experiences might become a light for someone groping in darkness. Perhaps you, the one listening to these words, need proof that a path forward, albeit always, exists. This story isn't easy to tell, but I invite you to take a deep breath and travel with me back to Oakwood, Montana, where I was born. A small town with narrow suburban roads, modest houses, and neighborly relationships so familiar that everyone knew each other's business. In our small house, it wasn't poverty that hurt me most. It was the suffocating silence. A mother who never knew how to smile. Poor Martha, who worked at the local laundry while taking in sewing at home to make ends meet. A father, Frank, who only opened his mouth when he wanted to give orders or complain about life. And a little girl who learned early how to become invisible to survive. That girl was me. From an early age, I understood that the world wasn't safe for children like me. There were no warm embraces, no words of affection, only days passing like obligations to be endured. My father was a difficult man. I never heard him express affection for anyone. He drank heavily, and when intoxicated, the entire house would fill with his shouting. Sometimes those shouts would transform into breaking objects, slamming doors, and often things far worse. I was very young when I realized my family was different. Watching neighbor children being called in for lunch with warm smiles, seeing mothers' hands gently stroking their daughter's hair, I wondered, would my mother ever look at me that way? Would my father ever call my name without making me tremble with fear? But that day never came. That night I learned that even the quietest dreams can be crushed by reality. My mother stayed. She never tried to escape again. And I began to understand that no one would come to save me, that no one would take me away from there. If I wanted to survive, I would have to learn to fight. But a girl so small doesn't know how to fight. So I did what I could. I learned to endure, and I endured for years. The little Eleanor became a girl who didn't cry, a girl who pretended not to feel, a girl who, even when everything hurt, looked in the mirror and promised herself, one day I'll leave. One day I'll be free. But that day was still far away. Before then, I would have to go through many things, things no child should go through, things that still make me tremble when I remember them. Life continued its course, and I remained in that house that was never a home. Each day was a silent battle, an endurance test. I knew exactly the sound of my father's footsteps when he came home drunk. I could identify by the smell in the air whether that night would be peaceful or if hell would return to settle within those walls. I learned to decipher my mother's looks, which always carried a mixture of sadness and fear. I saw when she wanted to protect me, but I also saw the helplessness in her eyes. She was a prisoner of that life, just like me. The difference was that I still had hope of escaping. The years passed and I grew up, but inside me the small, frightened girl continued to exist. I became a silent, introspective child. I was good at disappearing. If my father was in a bad mood, I would curl up in some corner of the house and become invisible. I learned not to make noise, not to draw attention, because drawing attention meant suffering. It was around the age of 8 that I realized something that would stay with me for the rest of my life. Silence is also a shield. When you don't speak, don't complain, don't cry, no one notices your pain. And when no one notices your pain, it remains yours alone. No one can use it against you. My mother, poor Martha, always seemed tired. Her eyes were always swollen, her face always marked by the weight of a life she never chose. There were nights when she would sit on the edge of my bed in silence. I knew she wanted to say something, perhaps an apology, perhaps a warning, but no words ever came out. It was during this time that I began to dream of escape. I imagined that one day a good person would appear and take me away. Perhaps a neighbor would notice something and help me. Perhaps one day my mother would find the courage to leave and take me with her. But none of this happened. School was a relief for me, a place where I could exist without fear. But I wasn't a girl like the others. While my classmates talked about games, hair ribbons, and sweets they had received from their parents, I just listened. I had no happy stories to tell.
I want to pause for a moment. If you feel the love and are still listening to my story, please subscribe and hit the like button on the Grandparents Memories channel to show your support. Thank you so much.
And that's how I spent the following years, waiting for the right moment, surviving one day at a time. But life sometimes has its own plans. Because when I thought I had learned everything about pain, something happened that showed me I hadn't yet seen the worst. Life followed its course, slow and relentless. Each day in that house was a repetition of the previous one. I had learned to become invisible, to breathe quietly, to avoid my father's gaze. I knew that any wrong move could trigger a storm. But even when I did everything right, even when I huddled in corners like a ghost, the danger never completely disappeared. Over time, my body began to store memories that my mind wanted to forget. I jumped at the slightest noise. My hands shook when someone spoke loudly near me. I didn't know what it was like to live without fear, because fear was always there, like a shadow that accompanied me everywhere. At school, I was the girl who always stayed at the back of the classroom, not because I didn't like learning. On the contrary, I loved books, stories, everything that transported me to a different world. But I knew that if I drew too much attention, there could be consequences at home. Report cards were a problem. If the grades were bad, my father would yell. If they were too good, he would be suspicious. So I stayed in the middle, smart enough to pass the year, but never brilliant enough for anyone to notice. The only person who seemed to see me was my English teacher, Ms. Walker. She looked at me differently, as if she knew there was something inside me that I hid from the world. One day after class, she called me aside. "Eleanor, do you like to write?" I hesitated. Writing? No one had ever asked me that before. "Yes," I answered quietly. She smiled. "I want you to write something for me. It can be anything. A story, a thought, a dream." That night, while the shouting echoed through the house and my mother cried in the room next door, I wrote. I wrote about a girl who lived locked in a high tower, surrounded by shadows. But this girl had a secret. She knew how to fly. The next morning, I handed the paper to the teacher. She read it in silence and then looked me in the eyes. "You have a voice, Eleanor. Never let anyone take that away from you." I didn't respond. At that moment, I still didn't understand what that meant. But her words stayed with me. Over time, I began to realize that writing was the only place where I could be free. When I wrote, I wasn't a fragile, frightened girl. I was someone strong, someone who could change her own story. But outside of the notebooks, reality continued to be cruel. One night, things took a different turn. I was in the kitchen helping my mother wash the dishes when we heard the front door slam with force. My father had arrived. By the smell in the air, we knew he was drunk. My heart raced. My mother gave me a quick look. a look that said everything. Go to your room now. But before I could leave, he entered the kitchen, his eyes red, his voice slurred. What are you whispering about with that girl? He asked my mother, his voice heavy with suspicion. Nothing, just finishing the dishes, she replied, trying to stay calm. He snorted, looked at me and frowned. And you? What are you always writing in those notebooks, huh? My stomach froze. I never showed my stories to anyone, always hid the notebooks under the mattress. How did he know? Before I could answer, he lunged forward, grabbed the notebook I had left on the table, and began to flip through it with contempt. Nonsense, he muttered. You should learn to do something useful instead of wasting time with this garbage. And then, before my eyes, he tore the pages one by one. I wanted to scream, wanted to run and snatch the pieces from his hands, but I did nothing. I just stood there, motionless, feeling a piece of me being destroyed along with those papers. My mother tried to intervene. Please, don't do that. He turned to her with anger in his eyes. Don't get involved. It was then that I saw a look in my mother's eyes that I had never seen before. It wasn't fear. It wasn't sadness. It was something different, something dangerous. She didn't say anything more, just picked up a dish towel and began to dry the dishes as if nothing was happening. That night, as I cried quietly in bed, a truth began to form in my mind. I wasn't the only one who was tired. My mother was too. But what does a woman do when she can't take it anymore? When she realizes she's trapped with a man who will never change? I didn't know the answer then, but I would soon find out. And when it happened, it wasn't like in the movies. There were no emotional speeches, no dramatic goodbyes. It was something silent, quick, and irreversible. And that's how I spent the following years, waiting for the right moment, surviving one day at a time. But life sometimes has its own plans. Because when I thought I had learned everything about pain, something happened that showed me I hadn't yet seen the worst. Life followed its course, slow and relentless. Each day in that house was a repetition of the previous one. I had learned to become invisible, to breathe quietly, to avoid my father's gaze. I knew that any wrong move could trigger a storm. But even when I did everything right, even when I huddled in corners like a ghost, the danger never completely disappeared. Over time, my body began to store memories that my mind wanted to forget. I jumped at the slightest noise. My hands shook when someone spoke loudly near me. I didn't know what it was like to live without fear, because fear was always there, like a shadow that accompanied me everywhere. At school, I was the girl who always stayed at the back of the classroom, not because I didn't like learning. On the contrary, I loved books, stories, everything that transported me to a different world. But I knew that if I drew too much attention, there could be consequences at home. Report cards were a problem. If the grades were bad, my father would yell. If they were too good, he would be suspicious. So I stayed in the middle, smart enough to pass the year, but never brilliant enough for anyone to notice. The only person who seemed to see me was my English teacher, Ms. Walker. She looked at me differently, as if she knew there was something inside me that I hid from the world. One day after class, she called me aside. "Eleanor, do you like to write?" I hesitated. Writing? No one had ever asked me that before. "Yes," I answered quietly. She smiled. "I want you to write something for me. It can be anything. A story, a thought, a dream." That night, while the shouting echoed through the house and my mother cried in the room next door, I wrote. I wrote about a girl who lived locked in a high tower, surrounded by shadows. But this girl had a secret. She knew how to fly. The next morning, I handed the paper to the teacher. She read it in silence and then looked me in the eyes. "You have a voice, Eleanor. Never let anyone take that away from you." I didn't respond. At that moment, I still didn't understand what that meant, but her words stayed with me. Over time, I began to realize that writing was the only place where I could be free. When I wrote, I wasn't a fragile, frightened girl. I was someone strong, someone who could change her own story. But outside of the notebooks, reality continued to be cruel. One night, things took a different turn. I was in the kitchen helping my mother wash the dishes when we heard the front door slam with force. My father had arrived. By the smell in the air, we knew he was drunk. My heart raced. My mother gave me a quick look, a look that said everything. "Go to your room now." But before I could leave, he entered the kitchen, his eyes red, his voice slurred. "What are you whispering about with that girl?" he asked my mother, his voice heavy with suspicion. "Nothing, just finishing the dishes," she replied, trying to stay calm. He snorted, looked at me and frowned. "And you? What are you always writing in those notebooks, huh?" My stomach froze. I never showed my stories to anyone, always hid the notebooks under the mattress. How did he know? Before I could answer, he lunged forward, grabbed the notebook I had left on the table, and began to flip through it with contempt. "Nonsense," he muttered. "You should learn to do something useful instead of wasting time with this garbage." And then, before my eyes, he tore the pages one by one. I wanted to scream, wanted to run and snatch the pieces from his hands, but I did nothing. I just stood there, motionless, feeling a piece of me being destroyed along with those papers. My mother tried to intervene. "Please, don't do that." He turned to her with anger in his eyes. "Don't get involved." It was then that I saw a look in my mother's eyes that I had never seen before. It wasn't fear, it wasn't sadness, it was something different, something dangerous. She didn't say anything more, just picked up a dish towel and began to dry the dishes as if nothing was happening. That night, as I cried quietly in bed, a truth began to form in my mind. I wasn't the only one who was tired. My mother was too. But what does a woman do when she can't take it anymore? When she realizes she's trapped with a man who will never change? I didn't know the answer then, but I would soon find out. And when it happened, it wasn't like in the movies. There were no emotional speeches, no dramatic goodbyes. It was something silent, quick, and irreversible. The following days were different. Not because something had changed in the routine of that house. The cycle of fear and silence continued the same. But because something inside me had broken along with those torn pages. I had lost so much before, but never in such a cruel and definitive way. My stories were the only piece of the world that was mine, the only space where I could exist without fear, where no one could touch me. But now even that had been taken from me. My mother continued her routine as always, but I could see in her eyes that she too was trapped in a suffering that seemed to have no end. Her gaze was more distant, as if she were no longer there. I didn't understand at that time, but today I know she was slowly giving up, a little more each day. I wanted to believe there was something I could do, that perhaps if I were a better daughter, she might find a reason to change our reality. But deep down, I knew the problem was never her. The problem was him, and he wasn't going to change. It was then that something happened, something that changed everything. One afternoon, I was coming home from school earlier than usual. The sun was still high in the sky, and for the first time in a long time, I felt the wind on my face. With no rush to get home, I knew that at this hour my father would not yet have returned from the sawmill, and my mother would be busy with her chores. When I entered the house, I found the door ajar. That alone was unusual. My mother never left the door open, even during the day. As I pushed it open slowly, I saw something that made me freeze in place. My mother was sitting at the kitchen table, holding a small suitcase on her lap. Her eyes were fixed on the floor, and her hands were trembling slightly. My breath caught in my throat. I knew exactly what that meant. She was leaving. My heart raced. I wanted to run to her, ask what was happening, beg her to take me with her, but at the same time, something prevented me from moving. It was then that she raised her eyes to me. "Eleanor," her voice came out weak, as if each word weighed a ton. I remained silent, waiting for her to continue. "I can't anymore," she murmured. My chest tightened. "Then take me with you." She closed her eyes and sighed, and at that moment I realized that this idea had never crossed her mind. She wasn't running away to start over. She was running away to survive, and there was no room for me in that plan. The pain was immediate, a blow so strong it took my breath away. "I'll come back for you," she said, trying to force a smile. But I already knew. She wouldn't return. I could see in her look that this wasn't a true promise. I could feel that when she left through that door, I would be alone. And I was. She left that same afternoon, while I watched from the window, unable to run after her, unable to call out to her. I stayed there for hours, hoping she would change her mind, that she would come running back and take me with her. But night fell, and she never returned. That's how I understood, once and for all, that I had no one left. That night, for the first time in my life, I cried until I fell asleep. And the next day, when my father realized my mother had left, I learned that my life was about to become much, much worse. The next morning I woke up to silence, but it wasn't the usual silence of that house, the one that hung in the air like an invisible threat. It was a different emptiness. Something was wrong. For an instant, my heart filled with a naive hope. Had my mother returned during the night? Had it all been a mistake? But it was enough to look at the other side of the room, at her empty bed, to know. No, she was gone, and now only I remained. I got up slowly, my eyes still burning from crying the night before. My bare feet touched the cold kitchen floor, and for the first time, I saw the house differently. The smell of coffee that my mother used to make wasn't there. The pots weren't on the stove. The table wasn't set. And then I remembered him. My stomach turned. If my mother was no longer there, what did that mean for me? My father hadn't woken up yet. It was early, and I knew he had been drinking the night before, which meant he would wake up in a bad mood. I tried to stay calm, tried to act like any other morning, but nothing was the same. And then I heard the heavy footsteps coming from his room. My entire body tensed. The door opened with force, and he appeared in the hallway. His gaze was cloudy, his face tired, but as soon as he saw the empty kitchen, something lit up in him. He frowned, looked around as if trying to understand what was happening. "Where's your mother?" he asked. I remained mute. My heart was beating so hard I could hear it in my ears. "I'm asking you," he shouted, taking a step in my direction. She left." My voice came out small, almost a whisper.
I want to pause for a moment. If you feel the love and are still listening to my story, please subscribe and hit the like button on the Grandparents Memories channel to show your support. Thank you so much.
The silence that followed was worse than any shout. My father looked at me for a long time, his eyes becoming darker and darker. Then, without warning, he punched the table, making the dishes shake. "That ungrateful woman left," he spat the words with hatred. "She abandoned us." The words echoed in my head, and for a moment I almost believed them. But then something inside me revolted. She hadn't abandoned us. She had left me behind. But I didn't say anything. I just stood there, waiting for what would come next. And it came. The first slap was so strong that my face burned. I had never been hit like that before. My father had never been an affectionate man, but my mother had somehow always managed to keep him away from me. Now, without her, there was no more protection. I fell to the floor, tasting blood in my mouth. "Don't cry, Eleanor. Don't cry." I got up slowly, keeping my gaze down. I knew that if I looked directly at him, it would only make things worse. He muttered something and went to the front door, leaving without looking back. The door slammed shut, and I was left alone in the kitchen, feeling my face throbbing. It was the first of many, because after that day, my father became something even worse than before. He sank into drinking, into resentment, and began to take everything out on me. The days became long, the night baths unbearable. Anything was a reason for his anger. A poorly washed plate, an answer given in the wrong tone, a look he didn't like. And I learned to be even more silent, because now, besides having no one to protect me, I knew that every wrong word could cost me dearly. I endured because I had no choice. But one day, something happened, something that made me realize that if I didn't run away from there, one day I wouldn't leave that house alive. The days passed one after another, all carrying the same weight, the same unbearable tension. Without my mother there, everything got worse. My father sank deeper and deeper into drinking, and I became his main target. I knew what came before each explosion, the strong smell of alcohol in the air, the dragging footsteps, the muttering that soon turned into shouting. I learned to anticipate, to notice the signs, to find hiding places within that house. But it didn't help. Sooner or later, he always found me. The aggressions became part of the routine. At first they were pushes, slaps. Then came the punches. I tried not to react, tried to convince myself that if I didn't give him a reason, if I kept myself small and invisible, he would forget about me. But it was impossible. And so I became someone else. The quiet girl who dreamed of escaping began to disappear. In her place emerged someone hardened by pain, by loneliness, by constant fear. But what really made me understand that I couldn't stay there was the day I almost died. It was a cold night. My father had spent the entire day drinking, as usual. I tried to avoid crossing his path, but in that small house, there was nowhere to run. He started shouting out of nowhere, threw a whiskey glass against the wall, spilled drink on the floor. I knew it was a matter of time before he turned his anger on me. I stood in the doorway of the room, trying to decide whether I should run outside or curl up in a corner and hope he would forget me. But he saw me. His eyes were red, his face distorted. He staggered toward me, and when he grabbed my arm with force, I knew this was going to be worse than the other times. "You think you can look at me like that?" His voice came out slurred, full of venom. I didn't even know how I was looking at him, but anything I did would be a reason. He pulled me hard, and I tried to break free. It was instinctive, but a mistake, because it enraged him even more. "You are nothing," he shouted, throwing me against the wall. My head hit hard, and everything spun. The pain came immediately, sharp, suffocating. I felt the blood running warm down the back of my neck. My body weakened, my legs could barely support me. But even dizzy, even feeling I could pass out at any moment, I saw it. I saw in his eyes that this time, he wasn't going to stop. This time, he was going to kill me. And there, in that fraction of a second, something inside me screamed louder than fear. "Run!" I used the last bit of strength I had left and bolted through the front door. I didn't look back, didn't think, just ran. Ran away from that house, away from that man. Ran down the suburban road with bare feet, not feeling the cold, not feeling the stones cutting my skin. Ran as if my life depended on it, because it did. I didn't know where I was going. I only knew I couldn't go back. And there, on that dark night, with the wind cutting my face and my heart about to explode in my chest, I finally understood. Either I ran away for good, or I wouldn't survive to tell my story. The suburban road seemed endless. I ran until my legs couldn't take it anymore, until my lungs burned and the taste of blood rose to my throat. The cold wind cut my face, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. The only thing accompanying me that night was the sound of my own footsteps and the fear that at any moment he might appear behind me. I wondered if he would have the courage to look for me, if he would be too drunk to notice my escape, or if he simply didn't care. When I finally stopped, my feet were injured, dirty with dust and blood. My body was shaking, not just from the cold, but from the shock. I sat down next to an old fence, feeling the night around me. It was the first time I truly realized what had happened. I had run away. I had finally left that house. But now what? Reality hit hard. I had no money, nowhere to go, didn't know anyone who could take me in. My mother had disappeared without a trace. I was alone in the world, not knowing what to do. My first instinct was to return to school. It was the only place where I felt a minimum of safety, where at least some people seemed to care. Maybe my English teacher, Ms. Walker, could help me. Maybe someone would see me there and ask what was happening. So I got up and continued walking. It took hours until the first rays of sun appeared on the horizon. Fatigue weighed on me, but adrenaline still kept me on my feet. When I saw the school gates in the distance, something inside me loosened. I hoped that when I entered, someone would look at me and notice, would see me as I really was, a girl running from death. But when I passed through the gates and saw the students arriving like any other day, I realized that for them, nothing had changed. I was just one more person. Ms. Walker was in the courtyard, and something inside me pushed me in her direction. She looked at me, and immediately her face changed. "Eleanor, what happened?" My throat closed. I couldn't answer. She took me by the arm and led me to an empty room, sat me in a chair, looked at the cuts on my feet, at the dried blood on the back of my neck. "Who did this to you?" I wanted to answer, wanted to tell everything, but for so long I had learned not to speak, not to trust, that the words simply wouldn't come out. She didn't insist. "Wait here," she said. She left, and I remained there alone, feeling my body finally give in to fatigue. I should have been scared, but for the first time in a long time, I felt something different. Hope, perhaps. Just maybe my story wouldn't end there. I stayed in that room for what seemed like an eternity. The silence was different from what I knew. It wasn't that heavy silence of my house, full of fear and invisible threats. It was a silence of waiting, of uncertainty. My feet hurt, my head throbbed, and I could barely think straight. I only knew that I had made it this far and now needed to deal with what would come next. When the door opened, Ms. Walker returned, accompanied by a woman I had never seen before. She wore simple clothes, but had a firm and serious look. "Eleanor, this is Mrs. Thompson. She works for Child Protective Services," Ms. Walker said in a calm voice. Child Protective Services. I had heard of it, but never imagined that one day I would have anything to do with it. The woman approached slowly, like someone who knows they can't frighten more than life has already frightened. "Can you tell me what happened?" I looked at my teacher. She nodded, as if to say, "You can trust her." And then, for the first time in my life, I told everything. The words came out broken, low, full of pauses and hesitation, but they came out. I told about my father, about the shouting, about the fear that had accompanied me since I could remember, about the previous night, about how I was sure that if I hadn't run away, I might not even be alive that morning. Mrs. Thompson listened without interrupting, without judging. When I finished, she took a deep breath and said, "You don't have to go back to that house." Those words hit me in a way I didn't expect. What did she mean? Where would I go? "We're going to take care of you," she continued, "but I need you to come with me." My heart raced. I knew my life was going to change at that moment, but I didn't know if it would be for better or worse. My teacher hugged me before I left. It was a simple gesture, but it made me feel a warmth I didn't know. "You'll be all right," she whispered, and I wanted to believe her. I was taken to a children's home, a simple place full of other children who also carried their own stories of pain. It was strange, but at the same time, I felt less alone there. The days passed slowly. I wondered all the time what would happen to me, where I would go next. Would my mother ever look for me? But no one came. No news of her, no word about my father. It was as if I had disappeared from the world. Then one day, they called me for a conversation. "We've found a family for you." My heart raced. I didn't know if it was fear or hope. But what I didn't imagine was that this new life would bring me challenges I could never have predicted. Being adopted, the idea seemed strange. I had never known another house besides the one in which I grew up, had never lived in another environment, and now they were saying I would have a new family. In the first days at the Oakwood Children's Home, I tried not to create expectations. I saw children arriving and leaving, some happy, others crying, some returning after a while. Nothing seemed permanent there. But then a woman appeared. Her name was Sarah. She had a calm but firm look. She didn't talk much, but when she did, her voice was low and tranquil. I remember the first time she looked me in the eyes. It wasn't a look of pity or curiosity. It was as if she truly saw me. "How are you, Eleanor?" she asked. It had been so long since anyone had asked me that. I took a moment to answer. "I'm fine," I lied. She smiled slightly, as if she knew it wasn't true, but she didn't pressure me. "Would you like to live with me?" The question caught me by surprise, so direct. I didn't know what to answer. I wanted a family, wanted a home, of course. But trusting someone again, that was another story. In the end, I had no choice. A few days later, I packed my few things and was taken to Sarah's house. It was a simple but cozy house, so different from everything I knew. No shouting, no fear. But the fear was still inside me. In the first days, I barely spoke. My movements were calculated, my breathing silent. I expected that at any moment, Sarah would change, would show a dark side like my father did. But that never happened. She treated me with patience, without invading my space. She always asked if I wanted to eat, if I needed anything, but never forced me. One night, I woke up startled from a nightmare. The sensation of my father's slap still burned on my skin, even though he was no longer there. I got out of bed slowly, went to the kitchen to get a glass of water. That's when I saw Sarah sitting on the sofa, reading a book. She looked at me and smiled. "Can't sleep?" I shook my head. She closed the book and patted the space beside her on the sofa lightly. "Want to talk?" I hesitated. For so long I had learned that talking was dangerous. But that night, for the first time, I sat down beside her. I didn't tell everything. I still couldn't. But I talked a little about the children's home, about how I found it strange to be there, in a place where no one shouted at me. She listened, just listened, without interrupting, without asking uncomfortable questions. When I finished, she said just one thing. "You're safe now." Those words stayed in my head for days. I was safe. I wanted to believe that, but the truth was that the past was still with me, and I still had a long way to go. The days in Sarah's house passed slowly. Each morning seemed like a test, an attempt to understand if this was real or just a passing illusion. I woke up before the sun rose, a habit I carried from the times when I needed to avoid my father. My body still flinched at the slightest noise. My heart raced whenever someone spoke loudly near me. But in that house, everything was different. Sarah never raised her voice, never looked at me with anger. She treated me with patience, as if she understood that I needed time. Even so, trusting wasn't easy. In the first weeks, I ate quickly, as if I needed to finish before someone took my food away. Sarah noticed. "You don't need to rush, dear," she said one night while serving more chicken soup into my bowl. "Here, no one will take anything from you." I wanted to believe it, but years of fear don't disappear overnight. It was only after some time that I began to relax, small moments. An afternoon when we sat on the porch, just feeling the wind. An apple pie she made for no reason other than thinking I might like it. The way she folded my clothes carefully, as if each piece of fabric was precious. I had never been treated like this before. But as much as I tried to allow myself to feel safe, the nightmares continued. Every night, I dreamed I was back in that house. I saw my father looking at me, felt the pain of the blows, the sensation of having nowhere to run. I woke up gasping, sweating, my heart racing. At first, I hid this from Sarah. I didn't want to bother her. But she noticed. "You had a nightmare, didn't you?" she asked one morning when she saw me with deep dark circles under my eyes. I didn't want to answer, but I ended up nodding. She took a deep breath and sat down beside me. "The past doesn't disappear overnight, Eleanor, but it can't hurt you anymore." I lowered my eyes. "It feels like it still can." She was silent for a moment, then held my hand. "I can't erase what happened to you, but I can help you move forward."
I want to pause for a moment. If you feel the love and are still listening to my story, please subscribe and hit the like button on the Grandparents Memories channel to show your support. Thank you so much.
That stayed in my head for the rest of the day. Moving forward. What did it mean to move forward? I was in a new place, surrounded by a person who treated me well, but I still felt part of me was stuck in the past. And then something happened that changed everything. One afternoon, while we were cleaning the house, I found a cardboard box at the back of the closet. Inside was a photo album. When I opened it, I saw images of children I didn't recognize. Sarah appeared behind me and sighed when she saw what I was holding. "Those are my children of the heart," she said with a sad smile. I frowned. "Your children?" She sat down beside me and took the album. "I never had biological children, but I've cared for many children before you." I turned the pages and saw different faces. Some photos were old, others more recent. "Where are they now?" I asked. Sarah ran her fingers over one of the photos, as if caressing someone's face. "They grew up, went on with their lives. Some come back to visit, others don't." She smiled, but her eyes were full of longing. Each one of them took a little piece of my heart with them. I looked at the photos again, trying to imagine what my life would be like from then on. Would I be just one more among those children? Would I stay there for a while and then leave? "Do you think one day I'll be able to move forward too?" I asked quietly. She placed her hand over mine. "I know you will." I wanted to believe those words, but there was still something inside me that kept me tied to the past. And to truly move forward, I knew I would need to face it once and for all. The days turned into weeks. Gradually, I got used to the routine in that house, to Sarah's gentle gestures, to the fact that no one was going to hurt me there. But truly trusting, that still seemed impossible. Even when Sarah treated me with kindness, my mind told me not to let my guard down. At any moment, everything could change. I still had nightmares, still woke up in the middle of the night smelling the alcohol, hearing the shouts that were no longer there. And then one day, I received news I wasn't expecting. "Your father was arrested." Sarah's words hit me like a punch to the stomach. For an instant, I felt I couldn't breathe. "What?" My voice came out low, almost a whisper. "He was caught in a fight, drunk. The police discovered the complaints against him." I remained silent. My heart was beating fast. I should feel relief, right? But what came first was fear. "Does he know where I am?" I asked. Sarah held my hand. "No, and he will never get near you again." But the wounded part inside me couldn't believe so easily. I had spent my entire life running from him, and now they were telling me I was free. It was hard to accept. In the days that followed, my mind wouldn't stop. I wondered if my mother knew, if she was still alive, if she worried about me. And then a question began to grow inside me. What if I looked for her? I didn't know if I was ready, but I felt that to move forward I needed answers. So I decided I would go after her, and this time I wouldn't run away. I would face my past head on. I couldn't stop thinking about my mother. Did she know my father had been arrested? Did she think about me? Had she somehow also tried to move forward? I needed to know. With Sarah's help, we began to search. It was a long process, full of uncertainties, but one day we received news. My mother was alive and living in a town not too far from there. Looking back at the journey I've traveled, I realize that every challenge I've faced has brought me to this moment. Yes, I endured suffering. Yes, I confronted experiences that no child should ever have to bear. But I persevered. And today, after all these years, I understand that my story isn't merely about pain. It's about resilience, about fresh starts, and most importantly, about never surrendering hope. And that is my story. A narrative of suffering, of fear, but equally one of strength and new beginnings. If you've listened this far, I'm truly grateful to you. Honestly, revisiting all these memories isn't always easy, but if my story can help someone else find their way, then sharing it has been completely worthwhile. Oh, thank you all so much for listening to my story until this moment. I hope that what I shared today is not just a sad story, but also a source of motivation, a reminder that no matter how tough life gets, there is always light at the end of the road. Remember, strength lies within you, and hope is a flame that should never be extinguished. To continue spreading meaningful stories like this, please support the Grandparents Memories channel by subscribing, liking this video, and sharing it with your loved ones. I sincerely thank the founder of Grandparents Memories for giving me the opportunity to share my story. And don't forget to stay tuned for more touching stories on Grandparents Memories. Thank you, and see you again.